I've made no secret of the fact that Lady Bullseye is basically my favorite shaped card in this entire season. Let's take a look at how good she actually is after a little bit of hands-on experience. Lady Bullseye is a 2/2 with an on-reveal ability that afflicts an enemy card with -2 power, which means she plays as a 2/4 on turn 2, which is pretty okay. This ability also scales, though, with however much unspent energy you have in the turn. So you play her as a 2-cost card on turn 3, floating 1 energy, and she'll effectively play as a 3/6, afflicting 2 things with -2 power on your opponent's side of the board. Now, notably, much like classic Bullseye, she cannot target the same thing multiple times, so she is capped in terms of her output by how many valid targets there are on the board. For example, if you have 7 energy, play her, and she has 5 floating, and your opponent only has 4 face-up units, you're only getting the 4. That is an important modifier on her. In terms of how this card plays out, the way I think it looks is that this is a card that you just put into your deck and you are happy with its inclusion. Unfortunately, day 1 deck building is not built for cards like that. Day 1 deck building tends to focus around maximizing her. My thesis of this card is that the less you're focused on maximizing her, the better she's going to be, and I think that that will bear fruit. In addition, as an Afflict card, the release of a card in this space causes more people to play Afflict, which unfortunately also causes more people to play the cards that beat Lady Bullseye, such as Luke Cage. I was able to gain a cool 50 SP up to rank 21 with a Lady Bullseye deck, but it was a Lady Bullseye deck that was also doing some pretty powerful stuff apart from her, and she was a pretty solid inclusion, but definitely not the thing that made the deck function. Largely, I think that this card could be a sleeper, but in terms of what my expectations were, I do think she comes in a little bit under that. I'm still a big fan of a card like this that can be a combination good curve play and Mother Ascani target. That stuff is pretty appealing to me, but largely I would guess that Lady Bullseye in her release week will be overshadowed by Stick, the card from Team Clash that we'll be discussing tomorrow. That said, I do still have 5 decks for you guys to take a look at. This is the list that I've been playing and actually seeing some success with. The basic premise here is there's just a ton of overlap between the individual pieces that allows us to be a very solid points deck, and then we sort of take the Phantom X role of being a bit of a tech deck, except we're also able to play things like Mother Ascani. Much like the Phantom X tech deck role, we have access to some of those cards. Mobius and Shadow King mean that we can deal with a lot of the things that people are doing in terms of Stick. Red Guardian, our 3rd tech card, instead of Killmonger, although you could play Killmonger, I've been aiming more at the Captain Carter decks here, and you can see the basic premise here is to construct a deck that is shaped similarly to Phantom X, full of really efficient threats that are naturally afflicting your opponent. That makes it good against Captain Carter stuff in a baseline way. And I think that basically what I'm trying to do here is add a bunch of additional power to it. This is kind of the deck that I just kind of figured would be the thing to do with this card at a certain point in time, because there's a lot of really cool stuff to be done with Mother Ascani right now, and there's a bunch of overlap, right? You play a Laufey and you Grandmaster it. You play a Mother Ascani and you Grandmaster it. You Mother Ascani the Lady Bullseye, and it allows you to play 2 of them for the price of 1 and still get the total float on both of them. A lot of just different things going on here. There's 3 main targets for your Mother Ascani. Lady Bullseye, Abomination, and Laufey are where you're trying to go with that. When you have Mother Ascani Grandmaster, the latter 2 tend to become a lot more important because they're going to be the ones that get you super, super tall, but it's not a problem because both of them work well in terms of applying enough afflictions to make Abomination free. So you have a lot of things that loop into your other things. You can use Grandmaster for Mother Ascani or Lady Bullseye or for the Laufey that you have in your list. You can use all of those to make your Abomination free. You're really actually, and this is the weird bit, not a big Cyclops deck. Like, he's there, but I was very often just playing him and then like getting one turn's use out of him a lot of the time. He's a fine little card, but that's not really what you're here for. You're in the high evolutionary space for Abomination specifically. Now, the name of the deck, Don't Mock the Shocker, of course, does refer to the fact that Shocker is in here. Shocker can sort of stack with Mother Ascani, right? So you have the Shocker buff goes down, the Mother Ascani buff goes on the same card. Suddenly you're looking at two cost Laufeys off of one Mother Ascani plus the Shocker. That's really important. Generally, if you're gonna copy a part of Mother Ascani's effect or something that intensifies Mother Ascani's effect, doing so with the ability to hit the energy cheat part of her is a little bit better than hitting the power part of her. And so having like half of a Mother Ascani loaded up onto the Shocker is pretty decent in terms of intensifying her output here. There was definitely games where I was playing like two cost Laufeys and an Abomination on the final turn of the game. The other thing this deck is doing all of that while being a tech deck, which has upsides and downsides. The downsides are we're a lot more explosive in terms of points than Phantom X is. The upsides are that, actually. The downsides are that we get got by Mobius a lot more than Phantom X does, and we're a lot less good at timing our stuff to make sure our Shadow King doesn't end up hurting us than they are. You can usually get around that with some good play, and keep in mind that against certain decks, doing Grandmaster Shadow King might actually be your best play, but it is a tricky deck to play. Another way to try to synergize with Lady Bullseye is with Warlock. I've seen people playing Evo Warlock type things. One of the cool things about Lady Bullseye is that since she doesn't eat the additional energy, she's just a great card in Evo basically 100% of the time, just being a good on-curve play. At a minimum, I do think she's going to show up in any high Evo deck. It's just not necessarily like a great place to be. It's like saying this card is going to show up as card 8 in a destroy deck. Like, yeah, for some people that's super meaningful. For some people that's not super meaningful. One of the things that really sticks out to me, if I can go on a tangent here, is that Marvel Snap has not done a particularly amazing job at introducing new archetypes to the game. Marvel Snap's archetypes tend to, with some notable exceptions, be about card A plus card B, less than they are about specific archetypes. And what I really like about High Evo is that it actually did introduce a specific archetype to the game, that when they take these big swings on deck building on cards that are asking a lot from you and giving a lot from you across multiple cards, they can introduce new archetypes very easily. And I think that's a really cool thing that High Evo did, and I wish they would do it a little bit more. Whenever I look at Team Clash, I see a little bit of a missed opportunity. Anywho, that is all to say that while this is a card that I think will show up in whatever you're doing in a high Evo space, I do think it's going to be good basically no matter what. In fact, the more that you're a skip type high Evo deck with Misty Knight and Cyclops, the more you want this card. I don't think that that's the right way to play for this metagame right now. And the big reason for that is that High Evo as a deck tends to be about Hulk, about She-Hulk, about these big cards at the top end. And right now, we are not in a metagame where you can really afford to not be playing tech if you're playing mid-range. The big difference between this deck and the one that we talked about just now that I actually like is that that deck actually gets to play the good tech cards. And this deck is devoting so much to its offensive game plan, which isn't bad. It's just that as an offensive game plan, it doesn't stack up well enough against the things that are going exponential. And that's largely the problem you run into. This deck is also a little bit more vulnerable to Mobius, but I consider them both pretty vulnerable anyway. So as much as that is a point in the previous deck's favor, it's not a huge point in the previous deck's favor. They are both very vulnerable to Mobius, even if this one is more vulnerable. Largely, though, the dynamic that makes me dislike this one compared to the previous is that it is about big guys. We're doing stats, and if our opponent just outstats us, we can't win. And frankly, there's a lot of things that outstat a Hulk right now. I appreciate that there are a bunch of people who are willing to cope a fallen one and do things of this nature with Lady Bullseye, but this is sort of exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the more you make your deck about her, the less she's actually able to shine in her role. Her role is to sort of effortlessly do things, right? Her role is to not like make everything about her, to be a supporting piece in these decks, to just sort of help your other things work through sort of effortless action. That's what she's about. And when you start trying to be like, I'm going to build around her, which is something that like as creators, I think we're pretty incentivized to do on day one. I think people, that's sort of what they want to do. They end up forcing her into a role that she does not fit in. Part of why I liked the sort of effortless nature of the first list was that she didn't have to be anything, right? You didn't have to be her as an Ascani target. It didn't have to be that. You could just play her to be kind of okay and get a Cyclops proc, so you made sure that your Abomination was going to get cheaper later in the game and focus your Ascani stuff on something else, right? Like, there's just a lot more play to her. And in a deck like this, that is just like, I'm making a really big one. I'm going to have 1 billion energy and I'm going to play this Lady Bullseye, and it's going to be amazing. She's not built for that role. Like, when I look at this deck, I see a deck that would be better suited doing Man Spider Taskmaster stuff, because that is more exponential. She is only ever going to be linear. And you can try to do things that make her go exponential, like you can Wong her and things like that. But she's going to succeed, to me, as a part of a deck that lets her be herself and doesn't demand that she be the finisher. And that's the biggest knock I have on this one. Similarly, I think that this deck is one that can actually legitimately afford to do some interesting stuff with her. It's a deck that just likes having cheap on reveals that do things and fill up the board. It's a deck that I think does some reasonably powerful things right now. Unfortunately, the card I replaced with her in here is Gambit, Horseman of Death, which is probably just better. I don't know. It felt to me like he wasn't really on all the time or enough of the time that I was super happy with him. But there's definitely some really cool stuff that a deck like this, which is playing Wong and Mother Ascani, can do with this card just by including it. And I think that's really the thing that sticks out to me about how this card is supposed to be played and how this card should be deck builded around. Is just like, when you're doing something that has enough of the things that you already want to be doing with this card, one of which is Mother Ascani, one of which is things that copy on reveals, and just like things that'll give you some extra energy some of the time. Like we have the Bolts card in here. We have ways to convert her body if we play her earlier into something bigger, or if we play her later into something cooler. Just a lot of cool things going on, even though we're probably never actually images of iconing her because she has a 2-power body. There's just stuff that generally lets this card succeed on its own terms instead of demanding it succeed on the terms of being a finisher. And my big case here is basically that this card is, we're going to get basketball-y here, and I apologize to those of you who don't watch basketball, but I'll explain the analogy. She's Paul George. Paul George was never supposed to be the guy. He had some seasons where he would convince you that he was going to be the number one option on a team, but fundamentally was generally miscast in the role and was far better at succeeding as the second best player on a team where he wasn't asked to handle everything the way the best player is. They got to handle the ball. They got to make a bunch of shots. They got to do some reasonable playmaking. They got to play defense. They got to do a bunch of stuff. Paul George was pretty good at all of that, but they need someone, if you want to win with him, who is going to be better at some of it. And that's sort of what I think about when I think of Lady Bullseye. She is good at a lot of stuff and valuable and a piece that can help you. But if you're asking her to do everything, that's bad. She works in a team context. All right, y'all, I hope that helped y'all understand where I'm at on Lady Bullseye, a card that I still am holding out hope, or maybe holding out cope for. I have been fairly impressed with like just being able to have a card that's generally good, that does some other stuff when you need her to do that. But I will say that I do think it's very likely she's overshadowed by Stick in this week and going forward. That's a very powerful card as expected, and she ends up being a little more niche, a little more role-playery, a little more of just a card where it's like, oh, okay, to go back to the basketball analogy, you know, if she's Paul George, Stick is Kevin Durant going to the Warriors, where it's like, not only is this like ridiculous in terms of the talent, it's also just like this fits perfectly, and it does incredible things in terms of like just making it very clear how good this deck is. That's sort of where my head is at for these two. I mean, probably they're both downgraded. Maybe Lady Bullseye is like Tobias Harris and Stick is like Jalen Brunson going to the Knicks or something. But you get what I'm saying here. Hopefully the non-sports watchers understand that analogy. As always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I'll see you in the next one.